Hello, my name is Anita Guzman, and this time we're going to go over the last few chapters of the book Reframing Organizations by Lee G. Bolman and Terrence E. Deal. And in these chapters, we're going to discuss the topics of leadership, frame integration, and transformation. Okay, so on the agenda today, we will be discussing chapters 15 through 22, all the way to the epilogue of the book. And those chapters will be covering integrating for effective practice, reframing in action, leadership in theory and practice, reframing leadership, reframing change in organizations, reframing ethics and spirit, bringing it all together, and then we're all going to come to a conclusion and review everything that we went over. And hopefully, this will resonate with someone or any of you into thinking more about decisions and choices you have and reframing things that you do and the world around you. It really opens up options and gives you different points of views into making decisions for yourself. And this is great in business where you'll always come along with conflict and various circumstances that arise. And you always need to be able to adapt and change to these things in order to sustain your business. So before we get into each individual chapter, you will see that the common theme amongst these chapters is that it's about improving leadership practice. And that is very important because people tend to get confused about what a manager and a leader is. And they are two very distinct things. A manager tends to be somebody who will just get the job done, get the things done. Whereas a leader really puts themselves out there into understanding the different points of views around them, the different individuals around them, will have a multilateral point of view on things, such as using the frames here, such as the human resource frame, the symbolic frame, the structural frame, and the political frame, and really taking those things together and applying it in the real world. You will see that this will really improve your decision making and really will help your business thrive because in business, you're going to encounter people and you have to be social and you have to know how to navigate yourself in that world. And helping your people will ultimately help you and your business in return. So, going into chapter 15, we will be discussing life as managers know it, across frames, organizations as multiple realities, which is what we were discussing beforehand on the last slide. You have to have different points of views when handling things, and you'll see that is very important, especially when you want to do a business. And then we'll move on to matching frames to situations to help you see how you can navigate through these things. And effective managers and organizations. Managers frame preferences, and you'll see that that is also very important when distinctive characteristics between managers and leaders fall into play. And that is because some managers prefer to deal with things a certain way, whereas a leader needs to be able to step outside their own preferences. It's not just about you, it is also about the people who work with you. So, when we move into speaking about life as managers know it, traditionally, people think of a manager that can plan, organize, coordinate, and control activities of their subordinates, in a clear, cohesive manner. But realistically, this is not correct. And that is because Life of a manager, it's really hectic, right? With different situations that are always rapidly changing, and can be thrown at them at a moment's notice. And that most of the time does involve dealing with people and their emotions. You know, as I was discussing before, it's important to be attuned with other people, especially when you want to be a leader. You know, that's the difference between a manager as well. You will understand that every person has their own identity, their own individuality, and their own personality that will influence their own decision making too within your company or your business. And so, how do you deal with that? Um, there are different answers to that question, and that is why you need to have different ways of thinking when you deal with people in your organization. Heading into across frames organizations as multiple realities, you will see that any event can be framed in different ways and serve multiple purposes. And so, for example, that means like planning. Planning is something that creates specific objectives towards a goal, but it also can serve other purposes. And so, these purposes can also include, but are not limited to, political purposes, where planning creates arenas for airing conflict and realigning power. And then, so these multiple realities to a situation create confusion and conflict, especially when people see things through different points of views. And so it's always better to try and understand opposing perspectives. And this way, you know what you're up against and what you can possibly do in order to resolve that, right? And then this is because someone's mindset determines on how they act, right? And so if you know your opposition's mindset, you can develop plans and strategic ways of thinking in order to prevail in the end. Okay, and so matching frames to situations. When thinking about this, it is important to understand that it is a skill that develops over time and is vital to the success of one's organization. And this is because each frame provides its own support towards achieving success. And so, for example, when thinking about the future of your business, you need to ask yourself important questions that will help guide you in examining what your business needs. In this questioning, you may ask yourself if commitment and motivation are essential to success within the organization. And if your answer is yes, then you would most likely use approaches from the human resource and the symbolic frame. And this is because HR would provide support through participation, while symbolic approaches would help strengthen success by linking innovation to values and symbols. And so this really helps you in sizing things up and helping understand others' perspectives when matching frames to situations. Okay, and so when talking about effective managers in organizations, it is important to talk about organizational excellence, right? And what an effective manager would be. And so when speaking about organizational excellence, you will see that excellent companies embrace paradox. So they're loose while also being tight, you know. They provide a room for growth and innovation and creativity while also setting boundaries. And so they also have a clear core identity, something that they really present themselves as, and that their clear beliefs and values and are distinct on. And also, none of the characteristics of excellence are political. And that is very interesting, right? Well, that would be because when organizations are thriving, are being very successful, there is very little conflict, right? That means that everything is running smoothly, everyone is on the same page. So there really shouldn't be any ongoings that should disrupt that. And then when speaking about an effective manager, there is a lot of emphasis on structure, HR, and then on politics. And that is because there will be conflict when speaking among these things. And that is because conflict is inevitable when managing something, right? You have to be the one that keeps the things running smoothly. And so the effective leader characteristics that have a positive impact on performance would include positive self concept, humility, which is like remaining humble and wise, servant leadership, and that would mean that you put the priorities of growth and well being of others within your company, and that is very important because, once again, the people that help your company thrive are very important to your success. You're dependent on them as they are dependent on you. And so you also need to have an internal locus of control. And this just means that you have the belief that you are in control of events rather than controlled by those events. You know, when you're in your own self control, you're able to have different ways of viewing these things, as we said, was very important, and you're able to make a clear decision that is rational and not just based on emotion. And so, when thinking about managers' frame preferences, it is important to note that it influences leadership effectiveness. And this is because the ability to step outside a single way of doing things will ultimately help make your business more effective as well. The ability to use multiple frames is a consistent correlate of effectiveness, being able to have a multi purposeful way of thinking. And then the political savvy part of a person is a primary determinant of success in managerial work, because you need to be able to navigate through those political arenas with conflict and coming out winning at the end, right? Because you need to know how things are done. You need to map the political terrain and see how your opposing team is thinking. So that way, you in return can make strategic decisions that will ultimately help you to your own success. When moving into chapter 16, we will now discuss the topics that would include opportunities and perils that organizations will go through. And in discussing that, we will discuss the benefits and risks of reframing, and as well as reframing for newcomers and the marginalized. Something that people don't tend to think enough about and is actually very important and vital to your success. Now there are always benefits and risks when you're doing something, and that is no different when you take in consideration of reframing. And so, some of the benefits of reframing are that frames can be used to generate scripts, right? They can be used to generate a dialogue, a communication on how you deal with something. And then, so the essence of reframing is examining the situation from multiple vantage points, something that cannot be stressed enough throughout these chapters. And you will hear me say that a lot when we go through this presentation. And that is because multiple ways of thinking help you in understanding others, as well as assess situations in different ways and choosing the best choice in resolving that conflict or going about decision making. But then also, the risk can include that each frame has its own limits. Everything has boundaries, and so you have to see when you're choosing a frame and you're trying to reframe your business, um, how far can you go when you choose a certain approach? And so, what approaches can you use to help benefit you? And sometimes you will find that multiple approaches is what you need to combine together to make a happy medium in decision making. Also, when thinking about reframing, it is important to think about reframing for newcomers and the marginalized. And so, when you think about marginalized, you're going to be thinking about people that are women, people of color, and members of the LGBTQ community. And that is because newcomers and the marginalized experience daily frustration in a system not made for them and with no plan soon to adjust for them or their differences. And this is a quote by Gallows Ramsey and Associates that can be seen on page 340 of the book Reframing Organizations. And so, what they're trying to express here is that these groups of people um, continuously deal with conflict about how things are ran within organizations because they're not very inclusive, especially for these groups of people. And so when you think about reframing, it gives opportunities to these marginalized people, and it allows them to grow and help your business thrive because they provide something, a different point of view that others do not. And this provides leadership opportunities that are very important now in 2024, where people are more open and sensitive to these complex discussions. And so, in trying to create a more inclusive society, you want to include all of these groups of people. And although it is never an easy goal to accomplish, it is important to still remain aware and diligent in not excluding anybody because you never know what kind of strength they can provide in supporting your organization. Moving on to chapter 17, we will now be discussing leadership in organizations, a very brief history, evolution of the idea of leadership, and then culture and leadership and gender and leadership. When speaking about the history of leadership in organizations, the rise of big businesses really triggered an interest in the qualities of people who founded great enterprises. And so you can think of people such as Vanderbilt and Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller as these great enterprises that people wanted to emulate. And so social science really began to separate from philosophy, and it brought about two distinct approaches to understanding leadership in organizations. And, these coexisted for more than a century, and it included quantitative analytic research, which really emphasizes testing hypotheses with quantitative data, real numbers, to develop leadership theory. And then the second one would be qualitative, holistic leadership studies. And these relied on case studies and interviews with practitioners to develop ideas and theory about how leadership works. in practice, which takes also into consideration the symbolic dimension. And this is because people came to the realization that organizations had cultures, and those cultures really mattered when taking into the consideration of your success. The evolution of the idea of leadership first started with the fact that leadership is an activity and not a position. And that means you really have to actively be fulfilling your role and not just taking it up as a power move. Don't let the power go to your head, the title go to your head. There is real work to be done when you are a leader, and that is to be done with the people who work with you and around you. And then, so leadership is distinct from authority and position. Leaders really need skill in managing relationships with all significant stakeholders. And then when you think about leadership is different from management, you will see that managers focus on execution while leaders focus on purpose and values, you know? And then also, leadership is multilateral, not unilateral. And this means that leaders' actions generate responses that in turn affect what leaders can do next. And that really shows that there is a give and take. You cannot only think about yourself, and you cannot just have one view on things. And then leadership is distributed rather than concentrated at the top. And this is very true because leadership does not come automatically with high position. Just because you have a title does not mean that people respect you or the way that you will go about running things, okay? And it is possible and often necessary to lead without a position of formal authority. And that is because when power is too concentrated at the top, that doesn't provide much structure for everybody else and doesn't let people delegate um, conflict or to be able to overcome conflict when things arise. And so having leadership in all sectors of an organization will really help you run your business in a cohesive manner. And leadership is contextual and situated not in the leader, but in the exchange between leader and constituents. Now, this means that no single formula is possible for the great range of situations leaders encounter. And of course not. That's because each situation is different, each reaction is different. The amount of possibilities are endless on how you can go about that situation. And then leadership is a very subtle process of mutual influence that infuses thought, feeling, and action. And that really depends on the exchange between the leader and their constituents. Now, that also leads into our next discussion of why culture in leadership is an important concept to comprehend. Organizational culture is a pattern of basic assumptions shared among members of a group. And this is important in knowing, especially now with globalization driving a need to better understand what happens when citizens of one country try to lead those of another. Naturally, conflicts will arise because the way things are done in one place are not the same as what is done in another place. And so that goes into Globe, which is a company and an organization that surveyed more than 17,000 middle managers and 950 organizations across 62 countries. And within that, they discovered six leadership styles that was common but not limited to different cultures. And these styles consisted of a charismatic, values based style, team oriented, participative, humane, autonomous, and protective. Also, gender and leadership are very important in speaking about contextually. And so, when you speak about that, you need to ask yourself why the glass ceiling and the glass cliff when speaking about gender and leadership? And do men and women lead differently? First of all, what is the glass ceiling? What is the glass cliff? And so the glass ceiling is really a barrier that stops specifically women, stereotypes associate leadership with males. And so a lot of women are always oppressed and stopped from becoming in higher levels of position. And the glass cliff, meaning that they are always pushed over a certain edge in order for them to fail. And so women in particular encounter a lot of discrimination and conflict and always have to pay a higher price in improving themselves and getting to the top. You know, they always have to deal with the most extremes. And so when you think about gender and who leads, you will see that females actually have an advantage when they do leadership. And that is because they have a more sense of thinking about nurturing that men do not. Men tend to have a less favorable behaviors when managing, and that includes management by exception, you know, where, okay, they are expected to manage, but they don't take it so seriously, and laissez-faire leadership where things are a bit too loose and anything can go about. You know, females actually set boundaries a lot of the time, are great multitaskers because they always have a lot that they need to deal with, especially when in proving themselves against men. And then that natural maternal instinct that some females have as well, you know, really help in nurturing and wanting the best for people to help grow a community. It's very favorable. Of course, none of these things say that one gender is better than the other, but there are advantages that a female can provide that maybe a male cannot. And so you cannot exclude women, even though they are marginalized, because they can bring a sense of strength and intelligence that may not already be there within an organization. In chapter 18, now, we will discuss architect or tyrant, structural leadership, catalyst or wimp, human resource leadership, advocate, warrior, or hustler, political leadership. And then we'll move on to prophet or zealot, symbolic leadership. Now, when talking about structural leadership, it is important to establish if you're going to be a leader who constructs and places a steady foundation for doing things, or if you're just going to be a type of ruler who exercises absolute power just for their sole benefit because you have the title and the position to do so. And so, when you think about effective leaders, it is important to see that they share several characteristics. And so, effective leaders that are definitely in the structural realm do their homework. You know, they know what's going on, the ins and outs, and what needs to be adjusted. And so, they rethink the relationship of structure, strategy, and the environment as a whole, and they focus on implementation, you know, what is going to work in this new approach. And they also lead by experimenting. You know, they really take into account trying new things and setting a new foundation that is right for everyone. And now, catalyst or WIMP, human resource relationship. And now, what does that mean, catalyst or WIMP? Well, a catalyst is something that can set something off. Think of a domino effect. While a WIMP is somebody who kind of cowers there and doesn't set forth any motion at all because they are so scared. And so, in an HR leadership, these theorists view the leader as a facilitator and catalyst who uses emotional intelligence and social skill to motivate and empower subordinates. And so their power then comes from talent, caring, sensitivity, and service, in helping their people. And they typically come with a set of principles that are very people friendly, and they communicate a strong belief in people, are visible and accessible, and empower others. Because once again, the people around you and who you work with and for really set into motion and play how successful your business will be. And now, with political leadership, you know, you will ask people, are you going to be an advocate, a warrior, or a hustler? And this just means there are different arenas, different levels of navigating the political ways of which your organization could be running. And so, certain rules for political leaders that Lev Iacocca had was that political leaders clarify what they want and what they can get. They are very straightforward and direct. Political leaders map the terrain. They assess the distribution of power and interests. They try to make strategic decisions. They assess what is going around in the world around, what is going on in the world around them, and what the opposing team they're going against is thinking of. And so political leaders build linkages to key stakeholders. They build their relationships and they make coalitions. Political leaders persuade first, negotiate second, and course only if necessary. You don't want to abuse your power in any way. You want people to want to come to you. And if you have to negotiate, then that is a possibility, but you don't want to overstep boundaries and intimidate too much either. And when discussing about symbolic leadership, prophet or zealot, first of all, what is a prophet or what is a zealot? Well, a prophet is actually someone who is regarded as an inspired teacher or proclaimer of the will of God or a higher being, right? Whereas a zealot is a person who is fanatical and uncompromising in their pursuit of their religions or politics or other ideas that they may have. And so when you combine that with the symbolic leadership style, you will see that symbolic leaders lead through both actions and words. They interpret and reinterpret experience. And so they follow a consistent set of practices and scripts, which are led by example. They use symbols to capture attention, frame experience, communicate a vision, and to tell stories. These are all things that are vital in setting forth meaning for people in organizations. Because when you give meaning to people, they feel like they're doing something that is very fulfilling and important. And that is important for your organization and for your success because that will make them work more diligently and with a purpose. In chapter 19 now, we will discuss the innovation process. change, training and participation, change in structural realignment, change in conflict, change in loss, and change strategy. When discussing the innovation process, it is important for us to look at page 394 in the Reframing Organizations book. And that is because it shows a reframing organizational change model where it summarizes the views of major issues and change that each frame actually offers. And so when you think about changes, you can see that HR will focus on changes in the needs, skills, and participation of your people. The structural approach will focus on alignment and clarity, the political lens on conflict and arenas, and the symbolic frame on loss of meaning, importance of mourning the old, and creating new symbols and ways. And this all helps in creating new approaches and going about change in your organization to really expand and upgrade your business. Change can be a very big thing for anybody, especially within an organization. And so, when you go about reframing, you must take into consideration once again your people. And change sometimes can really be attributed even to a feeling of loss, for some people. And people really tend to overlook that. And so, what really increases the likelihood of an employee understanding and comfortability with new methods is training, psychological support, and participation. Okay, you really need to put in an HR approach to this and take into the feelings of your people and how that in turn will affect their productivity. And you need your employees with a clear mind in order to have a clear work ethic and for your business to thrive. Then, when we start to talk about change and structural realignment, you will see that the involvement in training will not ensure success unless existing roles and relationships are realigned to fit the new initiative. Okay, and so what does this mean? So that means that unless these existing positions and ways of doing things are not reframed and realigned to fit your new changes in your company, then things will ultimately fail. And that is because it is not the norm for people. Change is complicated, change can be scary, change is also new. So, with anything new, there will be certain mistakes. And so, people need a very clear structure in going about the new changes. And that is because change undermines existing structural arrangements, creates ambiguity, creates confusion, and in turn creates that distrust I was talking about because people now no longer know what to expect or what they can expect from the organization. So, just building those ways for people and setting the foundation for them will really help them in adjusting. And now, with change and conflict, you will see that change inevitably generates conflict. And that is because change sometimes usually benefits some individuals and groups while neglecting or harming others. And from a political perspective, conflict is very natural. And so, fights and challenges and disputes are best managed through processes of negotiation and bargaining among people. This creates those arenas that we talk about that give opportunity to really clear out any issues and then come to an agreement. And so then successful change really requires that political approach so that way you can build coalitions and make it a better place for people to come together to confront conflict and really come out winning together at the end. And also with change and loss, because like with anything new, um, that is brought about, you are letting go of something. And transition rituals initiate a sequence of steps that help people let go of the past and deal with a painful present while also moving into a meaningful future. You know, it really helps you to not cling to the old and not to rush either into the future. It helps you let go at a gradual pace. And then when you think about releasing a negative past, you know, sometimes it is important to realize that some symbols hold over people that have nothing positive to them anymore. And so they look for things to cling to find meaning again. And that symbolic approach will really help in that. Moving on to change strategy, you will see that I have there Cotter's 8 stages that he repeatedly found in successful change initiatives, right? And then when you think about these initiatives, it is important to think about them combined with the form frames. And this is because each uh, stage of Cotter's illustrates actions that change agents might take when combining the form frames. And it is important to know that not every frame is essential to each stage, but all are critical to overall success. And every situation and change if effort is unique. You know, everything is different, so every action and decision is different. Creative change agents can use the ideas to stimulate thinking and spur imagination as they develop an approach that fits local circumstances as well. Moving on to chapter 20, we will simply be talking about the soul and spirit in organizations. When speaking about the soul and spirit in organizations, it is important to understand that we are social beings attuned to cues and expectations from our workplace and colleagues about what to do and not to do. A company that loses moral purpose doesn't provide credible ethical structure for its employees. And so, soul for an organization can be viewed as a sense of character that is deep and profound and has a confidence about who we are and what we care about. You know, its values are deeply considered. And so, soul and ethics in return are intertwined and are essential for managing a fulfilling organization. And it really gives meaning to people as well. And you will see in this slide that soul and spirit can be categorized in 4 ways when you think about the 4 frames. And so, what comes to mind most of the time is a factory when people think about working. And that could be viewed in the structural view, where you need excellence and authorship to set a foundation. And then next, you'll see the family as more as an HR approach, where caring and love is really needed in your growth of your employees and helping productivity. And then you'll see the jungle, which is attributed to the political frame, where justice and power um, are really big characteristics that you need within your organization. And then also the temple, which is, of course, the symbolic approach. And that is where faith and significance hold a profound meaning in your organization's spirit and its soul. All of these four things combined together really give your organization an identity and a purpose. Now we will be moving on to the reframing process in chapter 21. When thinking about the reframing process, um, like anything, it is important to know that it is not easy, but it is doable. And so you need to know that it is actually unique when you reframe something because you're making something that is new and innovative. And so the reframing process really builds on skill, knowledge, intuition, and wisdom. And it helps in accessing what you already know, making you feel less confused and overwhelmed by doubt and disorder, and realizing you have many options in different situations. Feeling more confident and energized for the long road ahead is really vital to your success as well, because it stops you from being scared and intimidated by what can happen with this new change. Now, in tying it all together, you will see that artistry, choice, and leadership are really something that is valuable in assessing organizations. And it really deals with commitment to core beliefs. Leaders need to be deeply reflective and explicit about core values and beliefs that they want. Um, to have among their organization. And then multi frame thinking, of course and foremost, is something that needs to be applied. And that is because when leaders fail to take a multilateral view, things become too stifling and too narrow. And so they need to think flexibly, and they need to be able to see organizations from multiple angles. Um, if not, then of course they can't deal with the full range of issues that they may encounter. They need to be able to adjust and to adapt at a moment's notice. And multiple frame thinking is challenging, but it can be doable. It requires the capacity to think in different ways at the same time about the same thing. And that is very complex for anybody. But with practice and time and effort, that skill will be strengthened. And inevitably, these ways of thinking and reframing organizations will make pioneers come about. And right now, we need leaders and managers who embrace the fundamental values of human life and spirit once again. We really need a community once again to really uplift people and our organizations. We have really lost a sense of depth and um, empathy, sensitivity, and structure for people to really thrive their businesses. And so you need to see the world around you in different points of views. And you need to be resilient in your strategies and help shape events and adapt to changing circumstances. You need to understand the importance of knowing and caring for yourself and the people around you that work with you and work for you. We want you to be architects, catalysts, advocates, and prophets who ultimately lead with soul and spirit for your organization. Um, all of these things are very important, even outside of a business aspect. And that is because it really ties into everything that embodies humans. Humans need foundation, humans need care, humans need spaces for themselves to air out conflict, and humans need meaning. in order to live fulfilling lives. And so, using these four frames ultimately will lead to your success. Thank you, and I hope everyone has a great day.